I think the Super Bowl, in many ways, is actually a marketing phenomenon, right? And it's a marketing phenomenon in that really good marketing decisions made way back when by Pete Rozelle, who was the commissioner of the NFL, and Lamar Hunt, who was the original owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, really kind of drove the Super Bowl in a lot of ways. And I want to talk about that and then talk about how a lot of things that happened there, done by the NFL and then also done by the brands involved with the Super Bowl, help continue to build it as to kind of what it is today. So this may be a little bit of a history lesson, but if you bear with me, I think you'll find it somewhat interesting. So if you go all the way back to the 1960s, there were actually two competing leagues. There was the established National Football League, and there was the upstart American Football League. And I would say that the American Football League played a very enjoyable, from a fan perspective, brand of football, where they were throwing the ball all around the field. The point totals were high. They had a lot of interesting personalities. And they were very aggressive about seeking the college players that were eligible to become professionals after their eligibility had run out for college. So there were all sorts of battles for who was going to get this, that, or the other player. And that was actually making the business model a little bit difficult. So that really kind of forced the folks to come together. And one of the things that the NFL agreed to was that they would do, even really before their full integration, they would do a championship game between the winners of each of the two leagues. And believe it or not, I don't even think I have the title exactly right. The title of the game was something like, the AFL NFL championship game or something lame like that. But fortunately, Lamar Hunt saw one of his children playing with one of those balls that bounces way high, which was called a Super Ball. And Lamar Hunt said, well, we're coming out of the college bowl season. We should call this a bowl, because actually this was going to be the last significant football game of the year, because it was going to happen after January 1st, which was back in those days, the last day of the college bowl season. And because football is, only, occupies a September through December or January 1st portion of the calendar, if you were a football fan, you were starved for more football, right? So the whole notion that there was a championship game was a great idea. And, kudos to those guys for essentially naming it the Super Bowl. Now, I would say to you today, if you talk to people in journalism who do marketing and advertising coverage, and if they are rewarded based on the number of people that view the content that they put out there are no two more powerful words than Super and Bowl, right? And I'll tell you a little story about that. About 6-7 years ago, when I was the CMO at Subway, we were launching a new product. So around the end of October, there's a really good writer for USA Today by the name of Bruce Horowitz. We'd done a lot of stuff with him. Wanted to know if he'd be willing to talk about the new product that we were doing, right? And it was a decent product and all that. But at the end of the interview, he popped in a question like, "Are you going to be in the Super Bowl this year?" And I gave him a quick response. Well, the first story he ran with was what our plans were for the Super Bowl, even though this was like October, it was right around Halloween. It was, end of October, maybe the first or second day in November. And, he and I actually had a pretty decent relationship. And I said, "Why do you do that?" He goes, "Tony, at this point in my life, I'm paid based on clicks. And if I put Super Bowl in any headline, I'm going to get a heck of a lot more attention." And I think that's an indication of how powerful it has become. Now, if I step back a little bit in time, there are many things that have occurred in Super Bowl advertising which are legendary and had pretty significant impact. Ray mentioned that I was at McCann Erickson. I wasn't there when this happened, but McCann Erickson actually created the, I would say, legendary Mean Joe Green commercial for Coca-Cola. Interesting story about that commercial is that was supposed to be Terry Bradshaw, and it was not supposed to be Mean Joe Green. And there was some back and forth between Terry's representatives, so they decided to go with Joe Green. And the concept for the commercial was actually very different than what ended up being put into the game in terms of the commercial format. The creative team had an idea, because the rapport between the kid and Joe Green was so terrific, that they said, let's shoot this thing down in the tunnel. But that was really not the original plan. It was, as with many things in marketing and advertising, it was kind of a happy accident, right? And now, all these years later, you have people doing features about that commercial and how it came together. I mean, I know I've seen some on NFL Films and elsewhere. But that commercial especially was, basically the talk of the country following that. I think, not many people explored the issue of, a large black athlete and a young white kid and all the dynamic that was there. I frankly, in hindsight, I wish they would have, but I think that was part of its charm and appeal. And even when I worked on the Coca-Cola business many years later, you had the curious phenomenon happen of people at Coke saying, "Can you just give me a commercial like that?" And I didn't necessarily want to go into the entire history and say, well, actually, it was a happy accident. But if you give me enough time, we can do something in that same vein. Many things worked in the Super Bowl, but I think the next commercial that certainly stands out in the collective history is the Apple 1984 commercial. And again, you have to put yourself in a different frame of mind than you think about Apple now. In some ways, it's kind of humorous. Apple has become the monolith that they were attacking back in the 1984 commercial, right? Because Apple decides who goes on the App Store and everything else. But back then, they were the underdog. They were David that was attacking Goliath in terms of the computer space. And an awful lot's been written about that. But some of my friends and colleagues actually do the Marketing Hall of Fame awards. And Steve Jobs, who didn't go to many things, when Apple won for the Marketing Hall of Fame, he came because he believed that commercial was that important to their success at Apple way back when. And he thought marketing, in addition to wonderful technology and wonderful design, was a key point of what they did. And he was only too happy to refer to that Super Bowl commercial as an important event in the success of their business and their brand. So let me get into some other things kind of related to the whole Super Bowl phenomenon. I mentioned that piece that Bruce Horowitz did in USA Today in October. From a marketing perspective, Super Bowl season really does start around that time, because people are reaching out. They're asking the network that's airing the game, how's commercial sales going? What kind of price are you getting? Is the price going up? You probably saw $5.5 million being the price this year. And there's lots of posturing that goes on there. I'm not sure that anybody really wants to divulge what's going on. If you're selling the time, you always want to say that it's sold out. If you're buying the time, you want to kind of ferret out what's going on if you don't already have a commitment to the game. So there's lots of back and forth there. But the lead up to the game is actually incredibly important. One of the things when I was running Momentum, one of our clients was Outback Steakhouse. And Outback, it's a national business, but they didn't have the wherewithal to be in the Super Bowl. But we had a relationship that we built with John Madden. So we actually, John, as you may know, did not like flying by air. So for a time he took the train, and then he decided to switch to a bus. So we made this thing called the Outback Steakhouse Madden Cruiser, right? And we featured that in some of our advertising, and it was a very good vehicle to get PR when he was traversing the country going to games. So John was represented by Sandy Montag. Sandy's, certainly in my mind, kind of a legendary representative of all the top broadcasters. So Sandy and I put together the deal that created the bus, and then Sandy came to me and said, we're going to do an all-time all-Madden team. And, we ran, some ads on Fox. I wouldn't say we ran a ton of them. He said, well, it's actually going to be the first show, or the first part of Fox's broadcast of the Super Bowl. And I said, really? I said, so at the NFC Championship game, because back in those days, Fox had the NFC games. At the NFC Championship game, can we make sure that when they announce the Super Bowls in 2 weeks on Fox, we can get them to say coverage begins at 1 o'clock with the Outback Steakhouse all-time all-Madden team? And Sandy said, I think we can. So a combination of our historical media commitments, John's presence, and Sandy's ability to make sure we talk to the right people. When folks tuned into the NFC Championship game, which traditionally the championship games of the NFC and AFC are the second and third largest audiences during the entire year in broadcasting, right? So they're probably somewhere between a quarter and a third the audience of the Super Bowl. But when you can get your brand reference there, just as part of a deal to sponsor a show, it was actually a pretty terrific thing. So the equity there is great. And the very funny thing about talking about this today is literally last night, as I was switching back and forth between the Knicks losing in Chicago to the Bulls and the Rangers finally beating the Penguins, there on Fox Sports 1, they were replaying this show from all those years ago, right? So, you know, people talk about marketing value and how you value things. And they say, well, you know, what value do you get out of sponsorship? Well, I don't know how big that audience was last night, but there's a marketing value that's accruing to Outback Steakhouse because of a media investment that they made a quarter century ago, right? And again, that's kind of drafting on the NFL. So to my point of this big window, October 31st up through the Super Bowl game and after, this is another event that certainly fits there well. Now, the price of the Super Bowl spots is pretty expensive. So you know, over the years, a lot of conventions have grown up about the Super Bowl. You can't run a commercial that's already run there. You have to debut a commercial because that's what consumers expect. You know, you really should plan it far in advance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I was at Subway, we did many, many different things around the Super Bowl. And let me kind of outline some of them. We had a lot of success with the $5 footlong, and we had many different commercials that supported the $5 footlong. It was a very likable persona that was created for that kind of sub brand. But we didn't have anything new for the Super Bowl one year. So Friday afternoon at about 5 o'clock, somebody called me and said, hey, I know you don't want to be in the game, but we had, back then the game used to kick off around 6:25. We have some time between 6 and 6:30 that we can make work for you. And I said, okay, you know, we negotiated the price a little bit. I said, let me think about it a little bit more and come back to you. So Friday afternoon, we said, you know what, you have 30 seconds to sell. How about if I get 2 15s and I break those 2 15s? So one's in the commercial pod that's running at about 6:10 and the other one's in the commercial pod that's about 6:20. Now, why does that matter? Well, every minute that you go closer to the kickoff of the game, the audience is getting larger and larger. You're not going to get the same number that you get in the game per se, but you're getting closer and closer and closer. And the cost is a mere fraction of what goes on. So one year we took that as a strategy. You know, I must say that our organization, you know, the franchisees, the development agent, the other people in and around the business, they kind of love that. You know, they love being there. It's important from a marketing standpoint. Although the numbers fluctuated over the years, you've essentially have, you know, 110 million people that are paying attention to the Super Bowl. So your audience is through the roof. And importantly, as you folks have all seen, you know, things like the USA Today ad tracker and just the Monday morning conversation after the game mean that you're probably getting the highest attention levels that you could ever get, because everybody knows they're going to be asked, what was your favorite commercial in the game, right? So you may be dismissive of advertising in other contexts, but here, you know, part of what the average person does is they pay much closer attention, which is better for the communication of the message and perhaps more importantly, the retention of the message. So we basically looked at stuff that we could do around the Super Bowl each and every year, but different years led to different opportunities. So by and large, we would have multiple year deals with the various broadcasters that broadcast the Super Bowl. So we would often include in those deals the next time they got the Super Bowl, we would include kind of what the pricing was. And you know, it was more advantageous than was necessarily being quoted in the press. I wouldn't suggest that we were the only ones who would get that, but that negotiating approach was actually pretty good. In doing that, the whole circumstance around the Super Bowl is a bit more complicated than you might realize, because of some of the issues that they've had in terms of blowback over the years. They've essentially set up a process whereby you have to submit storyboards, you have to submit concepts, you have to show finished film well in advance because they don't want to be blindsided by something that they don't like. So, the more we went through that process, the more that I realized that, sometimes maybe you should submit commercials even if you don't have an ad in the game, because then you'll have something that's already cleared in case somebody falls out. So we spoke about Apple. 1984 was a big deal for them. Well, 2014 was the 30th anniversary of Apple 1984. So being a reasonably astute marketer, I figured that Apple was probably going to try to be in the 2014 Super Bowl. And I was like, you never know who's going to be making the decisions at this point there. They may have an issue at the last minute. So we submitted some commercials, even though we hadn't bought time in the game. And there were lots of issues with autos coming in and out of the game. But essentially, on Friday afternoon, it was agreed that Apple was not going to be in the game. That wasn't necessarily communicated to me at that point in time, but I kind of figured it out. So at 4:30 in the afternoon, 4:31 exactly, I got a text from somebody at Fox saying, we need to talk about the game on Sunday. And we were able to buy a spot at a very advantageous price. I won't use the exact percentage because we had already had commercials cleared, and we had a new product that, even though the ads had been seen by some folks, it hadn't been seen very, very broadly at that point. And there's no better way to do something than to get that 110 million people exposed to the spot. Another circumstance that happened, I don't know if you guys remember the game that the Ravens ended up beating the 49ers down in New Orleans. Well, that's the game where they had the blackout. Well, the blackout occurred right in the middle or right just before our commercial pod where we were located. So they ran our commercial once, and then they weren't sure it ran because there was kind of chaos down at the Super Bowl. So not just us, but the others that were in that commercial pod, we actually ran a second time. So we got, double exposure for no extra cost. That one I've got to say is, pure serendipity. It wasn't because of kind of planning or thinking about it. On the flip side of that, some of those deals that I mentioned where we had multiple year deals, when you're buying a Super Bowl spot, 2.5 years before it happens, also in the circumstances, because there was lots of demand, pricing went way up. So the placement of the ad was very good. One of the values that happens that is given pretty good notice now, but I can talk a little bit about, is the additional exposure you get because of PR and social media. So when we've run Super Bowl ads, let's say in the last decade or so, it's amazing that the total audience that you reach is more than double the size of the game itself, because people eat up the PR about the commercial, they eat up the background story, and you don't even have to do that really far in advance. I mean, we tended to do some of that outreach really kind of the weekend leading into the game. And, if you notice, media as this week goes on, there'll be more and more coverage of everything related to the Super Bowl. So, it's funny when people talk about this, They talk about the out-of-pocket cost, but really in terms of the size of the audience, the ability to double the audience outside the game itself, the fact that the attention level is as high as it is, it's frankly amazing that that not everybody is kind of falling all over themselves to be in the game, because it's got an enduring value.